Born and welcome to This Week in the Triangle, where I talk about local news here in North Carolina. And first up, we have a story that is absolutely crazy. It appears that there is a pandemic, and it appears that there is an epidemic of grooming and kidnapping in just three counties in North Carolina. This is Chatham, Harnett, and Lee, where we have seen four arrests just this year, all involving minor girls who were kidnapped and who had been in touch with their kidnappers either via the internet or via cell phone prior to their abduction. And so this latest arrest is a Carborough man, meaning someone living in Carborough, who knows where he's from originally, named Edwin Silva Badillo, age 22, was arrested on Thursday and charged with 3 counts of kidnapping and 3 counts of human trafficking of a child. And the victim in this case was a minor girl from Siler City, according to the Chatham County Sheriff's Office. This man, Silva Badillo, had been in contact with his victim through social media and had brought her from Siler City to his apartment in Carborough at least 3 times. And what is surprising to me looking at this case is that Silva Badillo is a registered sex offender. So he was arrested in 2022, and in July of 2024, he pled guilty to 2 counts of indecent liberties with a child. So he was put on the sex offender registry for at least 10 years, and he was sentenced to probation with a suspended sentence of 16 to 29 months incarceration. So a suspended sentence means you're on probation. If you mess up, you do anything, then you have to serve your sentence. But after he received the sentence, after he was out on probation, he was arrested and charged with resisting a police officer and intoxicated and disruptive. So presumably that would end the probation and, he would have to serve a suspended sentence, right? Well, apparently not, because apparently he was out of prison and not serving any sentence when he allegedly groomed and kidnapped this young girl. So, like I said, this is part of a disturbing pattern in just three neighboring counties here in North Carolina. Um, and so, just recently, another 15-year-old girl went missing from Siler City for a week before she was found in a hotel room with an illegal alien. And so, that man and another illegal alien, both charged in her kidnapping. This is Ronnie Suarez Left and Saul Ramirez Guevara. They're both, in the country illegally, according to the police. And so Siler City is not a huge town. You only have about 8,000 residents here in Siler City. So for two minor girls to be kidnapped from Siler City within just a couple months, this seems crazy. I don't know if I'm just hallucinating here or if there is this disturbing pattern. And just last week in Lee County, there's another illegal alien who was charged with kidnapping and statutory rape. In this case, this was a 14-year-old girl who he allegedly, according to the police, picked up from her middle school. And he was found in a hotel room with her in Sanford. And the fourth case was in Harnett County. This was a 15-year-old girl who went missing. She was found in Dare County, all the way out by a coast. And two men, Austin Lee Cole and Elihu Martin Mahler, were charged with this crime. So this seems absolutely crazy to me. These three counties are all next to each other. In just a couple months, you have four minor girls who are all, they're missing. And then it turns out, these men that they had been in contact with through the internet or through social media have kidnapped them, trafficked them, or statutory rape. Yeah, keep your kids off the internet. That's all I have to say, I guess. And the next story we have here is a little less serious, but, newsworthy nonetheless, which is a vehicle belonging to North Carolina State Representative Erin Prey was egged while she was speaking at a GOP women's event in Durham. So Prey told me that, her vehicle is parked with a bunch of other vehicles with GOP stickers, but hers was the only one with a General Assembly plate on it. So that, seems likely as to why her vehicle was targeted. If you're familiar with Durham, it is very much a liberal hotspot. And so, having your vehicle egged, Prey sort of took it in stride and said, oh, well, I kind of needed to wash it anyway. But to me, this is a signal like the theft of political signs that we reported on in Durham, in Orange County. This is sort of a sign that people are willing to engage in antisocial behavior. They're willing to violate social norms and social mores. So yeah, you can clean the egg off pretty easily, but it's not a good signal to me in what direction things might escalate in the future. And our next story here, also in Durham, the federal government has cut a grant to the Polly Murray Center for History and Social Justice in Durham. So, the Institute for Museum and Library Services had issued a $330,000 federal grant to a social justice center. And if we read the mission statement, it includes addressing enduring inequities and injustices and working towards fairness and justice across race, class, sexuality, gender, and spiritual practice. So this very much seems to me like a center that is pushing left-wing ideologies and ideas, but apparently that wasn't, a barrier in them getting federal tax dollars from the federal government, which the Trump administration is now cutting. And this is not the only organization pushing, LGBTQ or DEI ideas that has received significant funding through this federal agency. So there's a number of grants which have been highlighted by the Randoland account on Twitter. This includes 3.27 million for the Connecticut State Library, which includes supporting the library workforce as they integrate social justice, diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility into their daily work and approach to patrons. Another $2 million for the state of Maine, developing an exhibition for the Maine State Museum to represent a greater range of diversity and equity engagement than the museum has ever presented before. $1.5 million for the Ash Cultural Arts Center and its partners in the Alliance for Cultural Equity will address the structural failures that have resulted in disparities of support for locally based arts and cultural organizations. Another $1.5 million for the American Association of Museums, which will embed the principles of diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion into its field-wide assessment and accreditation programs and related standards and ethics for museums. So those are just the largest of these grants highlighted, but this is 93 grants total that I looked at, $3.1 million. Some of that from the federal government, some of that for, matching funding. I bet you could not find a single grant where the purpose of the grant was to promote some conservative ideology. But we have all these grants promoting leftist ideologies, DEI, LGBTQ, pushing it, promoting it, trying to correct structural and social whatnot. This is how our taxpayer dollars have been used, and this is something that now the Trump administration is cracking down on. So the Institute for Museum and Library Services sent a note to the Polly Murray Center for History and Social Justice, letting them know that the grant is no longer consistent with their priorities and no longer serves the interests of the United States. Now, I could have told them this a long time ago. Grants to social justice centers do not serve the interests of the United States. That is very plain to me, and gladly, I'm happy to see that we have an administration who shares my views on the topic. So in terms of protests here in the Triangle this week, we have the Griffin versus Riggs election dispute is still ongoing. So you had Riggs supporters and Riggs herself in Raleigh this week. So the latest update on that associate justice race, which is being challenged, is a ruling from the Supreme Court, which ruled that the registrations without driver's license or social security numbers, those registrations, their votes will still be counted. So that was the majority of the votes that was challenged, about 60,000. But the Supreme Court did rule that overseas citizens who had never been residents of the state should not have their votes counted in North Carolina state elections. And they also ruled that overseas voters who did not provide photo ID would have to provide that before their votes will be counted. So that election is still in doubt, but currently without North Carolina Supreme Court ruling, it looks like the results of the election will likely remain with Riggs, the Democrat, being the victor. And we also had multiple anti-Trump protests. So there are protesters in Durham rallying against cuts to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Apparently, The CFPB has some employees in Durham. This is one agency that the Trump administration has been trying to cut. But there is a lawsuit by the National Treasury Employees Union, to prevent him from exercising his executive power to do that. So it looks like there's reportedly dozens in the Indy. There's a photo I've seen with a little over a dozen. Sort of interesting. There's quite a few small protests like this, just sort of popping up. Maybe some of the same people, but definitely a sort of energy on the left to come out to these protests and just, in Durham, I'm guessing most of the people driving by are in support of them against Trump. But I don't know exactly what the point is, other than maybe to get articles written about them. There's this article in the Indy Week, or to feel like they're making a difference. I don't think the Trump administration really cares if dozens of people get out on the street in Durham. I just don't think it's really a priority for them, but I could always be wrong. And there's a much larger protest in Raleigh and Durham just on Saturday for another iteration of the 5051 protests. Now, originally, this name 50501 referred to 50 rallies in 50 states, but apparently this set of rallies was not just 50 states, but over 700 protests. There's a protest in Raleigh, a protest in Durham. Reportedly, according to the news, both these protests had over 1,000 attendees. That's that's pretty good numbers, considering this is like, I don't know, the 10th protest since Trump's inauguration, the 10th major protest. So the fact that the people are still coming out for these, either they're paid, which there's always allegations of that, or this is a big motivating issue for the left. Obviously, these are not Trump supporters coming out, so it's doesn't necessarily reflect a lack of Democratic support, but it reflects a sort of energy and a sort of passion in the people who do not support Trump, the people who oppose Trump, that they're still willing to, go out there and wave signs, even though the waving of signs itself not necessarily effective at all. And we had a little bit of a different protest at the North Carolina Central University campus, not quite a political issue, but a rally over poor housing conditions. So students were saying there's mold, mildew, non-functional air conditioning at NCCU housing. There ended up being 5 arrests at this protest. The university said this was an unauthorized rally on the campus that was, attended by a significant number of people who are not NCCU students or otherwise affiliated with the university. So these 5 arrests, there were charges including second-degree trespassing, failure to disperse, and resisting, delaying, or obstructing a public officer. So I thought that, this was sort of interesting. A lot of protests are aligned sort of on left-right lines. This, not quite the same as most of the student protests we've seen recently. So in response to this protest, the university's chancellor, Dr. Carrie Dixon, basically said, hey, I understand your concerns. And she said that they've been working to get over $100 million from the legislature to resolve some of these issues and address our campus's deferred maintenance needs. So we'll see if anything comes of that. So if you've been tuning in, thank you. You can find all this material at thisweekinthetriangle.com. I send out a weekly newsletter with all this information with sources, and I'll continue doing these broadcasts. That's thisweekinthetriangle.com. Thank you.